Hey everyone, LioConvoy here. Just a real quick pause here to address this. You're probably wondering why you're seeing this video re-uploaded. That's because the initial video got taken down by me because I have no faith in YouTube and its ability to protect fair use. When I uploaded the last video, it got copyright claimed immediately, and that was fine. I sent a counter notification, only the next morning to be hit with another copyright claim, this one wanting 7 entire minutes removed from this video because Warner Brothers is a bunch of big babies. Somehow, a company that does not care about this property, how it's handled, or in what manner that it is distributed, seems to care about whether or not YouTubers talk about it, which is absurd. And I have a high suspicion that the person who has done this is the same person who has abused their ability and has had other things that do not belong to Warner Brothers get copyright claimed and removed from other platforms. So I'm re-editing this slightly and re-uploading it in hopes that it'll work this time. This will not stop me from making this series, and if I have to, I'm just going to start putting it elsewhere and pointing you guys to it here. So we'll see how this goes going forward. Sorry for an interruption, we're going to go ahead and continue now. I decided to do a new series on this channel, but unlike other projects, this should be a weekly one. It's where I'll go through every single episode of the original ThunderCats cartoon and give a synopsis, the writer's notes, then my own personal thoughts on that episode. This shouldn't be a difficult series to put together and should give you all some consistent content while I work on larger projects. So let's begin. Written by Leonard Starr and initially airing on January 23rd, 1985, Exodus opens with a spacecraft departing from a planet that is clearly doomed. The occupants of the craft talking about the planet's fate and having a bit of banter at each other's expense.
Yeah, Jaga's always right.
Not always. If he was, he'd have left a smart-mouthing little squirt like you behind, Wily Cat.
Banter that the oldest member, Jaga, cut short.
We'll have no squabbling among us. Chitara, fetch the boy.
Jaga calls for Lion-O, the child prince of the ThunderCats, to be awoken and brought to the bridge of the ship because
if he is to rule, he must learn to take the bad with the good.
This is where he watches the planet explode. Jaga explains to him that it is now his duty to uphold and spread his people's code wherever their new home is. This is the code of Thundera.
Justice, truth, honor, loyalty.
Jaga also explains that all the other members of the crew will help him do this, as well as give him the skills to be a wise ruler, as all of this is an enormous responsibility for a child. The other ThunderCats mentioned by Jaga are Panthro, Chitara, Tigra, Wily Kit, and Wily Cat. These are the noble heads of the cat clans of Thundera. They are the warrior nobility charged with protecting and leading the world's populace under the code of Thundera. After this, Jaga ushers Lion-O into a sealed chamber to introduce him to the main focal point of the series, the Sword of Omens. And embedded in its hilt is the mystical Eye of Thundera. Lion-O grabs the sword and it springs to life, growing into a full-sized longsword. Much to Lion-O's surprise, it's alive. Jaga explains that the sword sleeps until it's needed and what sight beyond sight is. Lion-O asks,
"But if I do need the eye, how can I wake it up and let it know?"
To which Jaga responds,
There will be no need. The eye will know it is needed before you do.
Jaga then bids that Snarf have the other ThunderCats come in. As they line up, Jaga explains that they didn't need any special clothing on their peaceful planet, and that the sword was at rest for a long time due to that peace. Tigra responds to Jaga in surprise at Jaga's statement and at the sword.
Eye of Thundera? I thought it was a legend, a myth.
And Jaga explains not only that it does exist, but what its purpose is.
It will serve Lion-O as hereditary lord of the ThunderCats, and through him, it will serve you as well.
Jaga then proceeds to grant each of the nobles their protective clothing as well as their signature weapons. However, this sober scene is cut short by the ship rocking. They're under attack. Lion-O is told to wait in the safety of the sword chamber. Rushing to the bridge, the enemy is identified.
Yes, they're from the planet Thundar.
Mutants! Always those blasted mutants.
The ships bear the insignia of reptilians, jackalmen, monkeyians.
They're fighting together as allies?
The enemies are the mutants from the planet Plundar, an ancient enemy of the ThunderCats. In a later episode, it's explained why the ThunderCats weren't expecting this attack. But for now, I'll just say that a specified cook decided to operate above his station. Jaga calls for this spaceship convoy to surround the flagship they're in to protect it. The mutant leader, Slythe, makes this remark.
We watched those ships loading via spy star transmission. They're so packed with Thunderian pilgrims and their possessions, they could carry little by way of armament. Attack!
Making it very clear that they're not opposed to firing on ships harboring civilians. and this is exactly what the mutants do, destroying each ship until the flagship is all that's left, having not taken a real hit. This is when Jaga realizes why. They want the sword. The mutants lock onto the ship and form a boarding crew. While the ThunderCats demonstrate their special skills in repelling the boarders, Chitara's speed, Tigra's invisibility, Panthro's strength, and the Wily Twins' cunning, Slythe and Jackalman, the two mutants on screen, pillage the cargo to try and find the sword, with Slythe apparently being the only one of them to have ever even seen it. They then find Lion-O in the chamber with the sword, protected by his nursemaid Snarf. Snarf is neutralized, and this exchange happens.
Now, boy, give me the sword.
You shall not have it while I live.
That would suit me just fine.
Sensing the literal murderous intent of Slythe, the sword wakes up, and, while Lion-O's eyes glow, raises itself and lets out a burst of power. This display of raw, supernatural power causes the mutants to panic and flee back to their ship. Jaga rushes to the chamber, worried about Lion-O. Jaga asks if Lion-O used the sword to fend the mutants off.
You did it with the sword?
Well, the sword kind of did it for me.
Huh? I see.
The ThunderCats regroup at the bridge, and Panthro explains that the ship is damaged and unable to make it to their initial destination. So they choose another world. The drawback being that they'll have to use devices called suspension capsules to make the journey. However, the autopilot may not be enough to get them there in the ship's damaged condition. So Jaga says he'll forego the suspension and pilot the ship manually as long as possible. Of course, there's pushback. The others clearly love Jaga and don't want to lose him. But Jaga is the lord of the ThunderCats and is not a man that tolerates squabbling.
Enough! I am by far the oldest of you. Even though the suspension capsules slow down the aging process tremendously, some aging does take place. Even in suspension, I could not live long enough to complete the journey. So let's not have any more talk. Enter the capsules.
And with that, the other ThunderCats concede that Jaga is right, and arguing is only going to make it harder on him. Lion-O hugs Jaga tearfully, and Jaga tells Lion-O that it's his duty to be brave. Once in the capsules, Jaga thrusts the sword into the ship's floor and tells the others that it will be waiting for them when they awaken. He then sits at the controls and begins his long, lonely task of piloting the ship. Time passes, and a much older Jaga finally succumbs to age and disappears into nothingness. The ship begins to land, but one of the landing beams malfunctions, sending the ship into an out-of-control plummet, tearing it apart and with its crew being scattered at the crash site. The first to awaken is Snarf, who then sets out to find Lion-O. He succeeds, but both of them realize Lion-O has drastically aged during his years in suspension. Now, he's physically an adult. While Lion-O is in awe of this, it's clearly taking a toll on poor Snarf.
I guess you just always looked little to faithful old Snarf.
This is also cut short as the mutants show up. While Snarf finds the sword, Lion-O assumes he's offering him yet another toy and dismisses him. The mutants attack the sleeping ThunderCats, so Lion-O springs into action. Snarf joins the fray and tosses Lion-O the sword, but he's having a hard time recognizing it. This is when Jaga, now a spirit, appears before Lion-O and reminds him of what that weapon is.
Pay heed, for it is your destiny that you hold in your hand. The Eye of Thundera, the source of the ThunderCats' power.
Lion-O activates the sword and awakens the other ThunderCats. The team makes short work of the mutants, who then retreat. The episode closes out with the ThunderCats reunited, commenting on Lion-O's growth and that they'll have to figure out a way to survive in this new world. Show notes from Leonard Starr. The first story was written in such a way that it could be played as a 2-hour show, or an hour show, or 4 half-hour shows, depending on where it was being broadcast. Each separate station could decide for itself. We left Thundera because putting the ThunderCats in a circumstance familiar to the viewer, Earth, albeit an alternative version, would be easier, and a villain being a mummy would be advantageous for the kids. Subsequent stories would follow a traditional form. There was an obstacle that had to be overcome in order to reach a solution. We made Lion-O a child initially because it was a children's show. For Lion-O to start as a boy and grow into manhood would help the development of the show, and I could get some wisdom imparted into him through Jaga. We showed what was called creative violence. In other words, a lot of stuff happened, but nobody died. And now for my thoughts. This is, of course, the pilot episode of the series. Of note, though, is that the VHS release is how the show was initially supposed to be seen. The Exodus VHS has 4 episodes edited into a single, feature-length film, even having some parts that were cut out when the individual episodes ran in syndication. To this day, it's never been released in its proper format, save the VHS. This is the most well-known episode, and the one I rented the most in video rental stores when I was a kid. It's very obvious that Leonard Starr worked on comics with how the characters act and the pacing of the first episode. The fact that it establishes the Sword of Omens was primarily considered a myth is good world building as well, and only adds to the intrigue of the series and some of its mysteries. And while Leonard Starr clearly meant the initial original cast in the nobody died aspect, there's plenty of death in this series, not only from the destruction of the planet, but also showing the mutants are literally willing to murder civilians just to try to get what they want. None of the characters in these ships came back. It was never explained away as a hologram. Every single person in every single one of these ships is dead and gone. And personally, I think for a cartoon made in the 80s, that's pretty rough. But this episode cannot be discussed without the suspension capsules and Lion-O's growth being brought up. So let me put this to bed. In the original show, there was no malfunction on the capsule. This is not only backed up by no line mentioning such in the syndicated version of the episode or in the uncut VHS, but also because I own the script to this episode, and there is no mention of such. Lion-O aged while no one else did because they needed him to be an adult. That's it. The series explores the adventures of a child stuck in the body of an adult, while Lion-O mentally ages to catch up with his body. It was only truly retconned to be a malfunction in the 2000 Wildstorm sourcebook for the comics. And to completely put this to bed, I will offer anyone $100 cash to provide evidence from the original show, original comic, or scripts for this episode that state the capsule malfunctioned. There you go. I hope you enjoyed the first episode. We'll be back next week. Feel free to support me on Patreon if you want, or to hop into the community Discord. Take care.